My brother forged my name on a loan while I covered his expenses, so I exposed everything legally and left him financially ruined without mercy. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I've been the responsible one in my family. Growing up, I learned early that money didn't grow on trees, and that hard work was the only way to make life tolerable. I've always been meticulous with my finances, budgeting every dollar, saving wherever I could, and quietly taking care of things so my family never had to stress. Rent, groceries, car insurance, small emergencies. If something needed to be paid, I made sure it got covered, even if it meant skipping luxuries I could have enjoyed. There was a sense of pride in it, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing I was dependable, the one everyone could count on. I didn't mind it, or at least, I told myself I didn't. Then there's Jake, my younger brother. He's the complete opposite of me. Charming, funny, effortlessly magnetic, and completely convinced the world owes him a good time. He spends money like it grows on trees, jumps into schemes without thinking, and somehow manages to stay afloat because I quietly pick up the slack. Rent, I cover it. Car repairs, done. Random online purchases that somehow turn into necessities, also on me. And he smiles, cracks a joke, and makes me feel like I'm part of his life adventure rather than his safety net. For a long time, I genuinely thought I was helping him succeed, like a good older brother should. Our parents, they've always played favorites. Jake's every whim is celebrated, every tiny achievement amplified, while my quiet diligence is just expected. He's your brother. You should help, my mom would say. You know Jake doesn't manage money well, my dad would add. And I did. I always did. I made sure Jake was safe, happy, and cared for, even when my own patience ran thin. That sense of pride in being the responsible one, being the glue holding everything together, was intoxicating. I felt like I was doing the right thing, like I was keeping my family afloat. I had no idea that my trust, my generosity, and my sense of duty were about to be used against me in ways I couldn't even imagine. I started noticing small things at first. Little overdrafts in my account, random bills showing up that didn't make sense. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I'd miscalculated. Maybe a payment had auto-drafted twice. But then it kept happening, month after month, and my gut started twisting. Jake would casually mention he needed a bit of help for this or that, his grin always making it sound harmless, like borrowing a few bucks was just part of brotherly trust. And I'd pay, every single time. Rent, car insurance, groceries, a surprise expense for his laptop crashing mid-semester. My life became a series of small sacrifices, stitched together by his carefree charm. I tried to talk to him about it once. Jake, we need to be careful. My account is tight this month, I said over dinner, my voice cautious. He just laughed and waved me off. Relax, man. I've got this. You worry too much? He said, the casual confidence in his tone making me feel guilty for even questioning him. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust him. Meanwhile, the family dynamic wasn't helping. Our parents, oblivious or maybe blissfully ignorant, would say things like, "You always know how to handle money, right? Make sure Jake's okay." And I did. I always did. Every time they said it, I felt a mixture of pride and pressure, like I had no choice but to step in, to be the anchor in a storm that only I seemed to notice. Friends started noticing my stress, asking why I looked so worn out, why I never went out or treated myself. I shrugged, gave them a half smile and said, "Just work and family stuff." They didn't know the full story, and honestly, I wasn't ready to tell anyone. And then, the first really strange thing happened. A bill in my name, for a car loan I didn't take out, landed in my mailbox. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a sudden cold weight in my chest. I didn't understand it yet, but something inside me knew. This was bigger than just helping my brother. Something was wrong, and I had no idea how deep it would go. I spent that night staring at the bill over and over, like if I looked hard enough, it would disappear. But it didn't. My heart was racing, my hands shaking slightly as I flipped it over and read the fine print. The loan wasn't small, it was thousands of dollars, and the due dates were coming fast. I couldn't understand it. I never signed for anything like this. And yet, my name was printed in bold letters at the top. The next morning, I tried to bring it up casually with Jake. "Hey, do you know anything about this car loan? It's in my name, and I don't remember signing it." I kept my tone calm, hoping he'd just admit some mistake or miscommunication. But Jake, in true fashion, just laughed, leaning back in his chair like it was a joke. "Dude, relax. I mean, maybe it's some bank error. Don't freak out." His smirk made my stomach twist. That same charm that had always gotten him out of trouble now made me feel trapped, like my trust had a price I hadn't realized I was paying. I tried showing the statement to our parents. My mom frowned, flipping through the pages like she had no clue. "Well, maybe they made a mistake. You know, banks do that sometimes," she said softly, and my dad nodded. "I'm sure Jake didn't mean anything. Don't worry about it too much." Don't worry about it? I felt my blood boil. No one was seeing what I saw, and I was starting to wonder if I ever would. I couldn't sleep for nights after that. Every little expense, every favor I'd covered for Jake, started flashing through my mind like a highlight reel of manipulation. I felt a strange mixture of guilt and anger. Guilt for trusting too much, anger for being taken for granted. The apartment felt colder, the streets quieter, and even the sunlight seemed sharper, like it was pointing out every flaw in my judgment. That was the first moment I truly started doubting everything. My pride in being the responsible brother suddenly felt naive, foolish. And deep down, I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something wasn't right, and whatever it was bigger than just a mistake. Something was very, very wrong, and I had no idea how bad it would get. It took me a week of quiet panic before I decided to dig deeper. I logged into my online accounts, cross-checked statements, and started tracing every transaction Jake had made with my money. That's when it hit me. The pattern was unmistakable. Every emergency he'd ever asked me to cover lined up suspiciously with new credit card charges, online purchases, and now this massive loan in my name. My chest tightened, a sickening combination of disbelief and fury washing over me. I had been paying for his reckless lifestyle for years, and somehow he had gone a step further. He had actually forged my name. I tried confronting him again, this time armed with screenshots and bank statements. "Jake, this isn't a mistake anymore. You signed this loan with my name. You forged it. Do you understand what that means?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. He froze, a flicker of panic crossing his usual confident grin. It's not what you think," he stammered, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew he'd been caught. Our parents? They were still in denial. "Jake would never do something like that. Maybe the bank is mistaken," my mom said, voice trembling. My dad just shook his head, muttering, "We'll figure it out, son. Don't jump to conclusions." I felt trapped in a room full of people who refused to see the truth, like I was the crazy one. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city outside glowing softly, indifferent to my crisis. I could hear the hum of traffic, the distant laughter of people who had no idea how quickly my life could unravel. I felt like I was drowning in betrayal, All the sacrifices I'd made, all the late nights covering bills and fixing problems, had been feeding a lie. I'd always thought being the responsible brother made me reliable, trustworthy, even heroic. Now it felt like a weapon had been turned against me, one I couldn't defend myself from. I didn't know how I'd fight back, or if I even could. But one thing was painfully clear. My trust had been completely exploited. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily Jake had weaponized my trust. I felt raw, exposed, and furious. But beneath it all, a strange clarity began to form. If I wanted justice, I couldn't rely on family understanding, or Jake suddenly having a conscience. I had to handle this legally. I spent hours researching fraud laws, reading forums, watching videos of people who had faced identity theft, and slowly piecing together a plan. Every article, every legal precedent, every warning about forged signatures made my stomach churn, but also strengthened my resolve. I started gathering evidence meticulously: bank statements, screenshots of texts where Jake begged for bailouts, and emails that hinted at his evasive behavior. I even documented small patterns that, in hindsight, were screaming red flags. The way he always seemed to know exactly when I'd have extra cash. The way he forgot his wallet when bills were due. Each discovery fueled my anger, but also my determination. I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control, proving that I wasn't a doormat, and finally holding him accountable for years of manipulation. But the reality hit me hard. This was my rock bottom moment. The thought of facing a bank, explaining forged documents, possibly dealing with collections or ruined credit. I felt the weight of every sacrifice I'd made crashing down on me. All the late nights covering bills, all the times I'd smoothed over his messes. And yet, I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let him get away with it. I consulted a lawyer, quietly and cautiously. The initial conversation left me both reassured and terrified. There was a clear path to hold Jake fully accountable, but it wouldn't be easy. This would be messy, emotional, and potentially public. I realized that my life was about to change dramatically. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the apartment silent except for the faint hum of my computer. I could feel the storm coming, and I knew that once I made the first move, there would be no turning back. I just didn't yet know how far Jake would sink before the hammer fell. The day I decided to confront Jake felt like stepping into a storm I couldn't control. I had all the evidence, every bank statement, every text, every instance of manipulation neatly organized in a folder on my laptop. But walking into our shared living space that evening, I felt a knot in my stomach. "Jake, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady, but my hands a little clammy. He looked up from the couch, grinning like nothing was wrong, that familiar charm plastered across his face. "I'm busy, man. What's up?" he said casually, flicking through his phone. I put the folder on the coffee table, leaning over so he couldn't miss it. "This. Every payment you've taken from me, every bill I've covered, and now this forged loan in my name. Do you even understand what you've done?" My words felt heavier than I expected, like the weight of years of betrayal finally pressing down on both of us. He froze for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of fear. But then the old smirk returned. "Come on, don't make it a big deal. I didn't think you'd take it personally," he said, trying to laugh it off. But this time I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes locked on him, letting him feel a fraction of the panic and betrayal I'd carried silently for years. The family dynamic made it worse. Mom popped her head in, voice trembling. "Maybe this is just a misunderstanding, honey." Dad leaned against the doorway, muttering, "We'll sort it out. Just calm down." But I was done calming down. Every time I trusted them to see the truth, they'd looked away. Now I was the one holding the evidence, the one in control. The tension in the room was electric. Jake's bravado started to crack, just slightly, as he realized I wasn't bluffing. My heart pounded, but beneath the fear and anger, a cold determination settled in. I knew the next few hours could change everything between us forever, and I wasn't going to back down. And as I watched him squirm, I realized the game had shifted. This time, the power was in my hands. After that confrontation, I knew I couldn't rely on Jake or anyone in my family to admit the truth. If I wanted real justice, I had to build my case beyond personal arguments. I needed allies who could corroborate everything. I started quietly reaching out to friends who had witnessed Jake's habits, colleagues who had seen him borrow money under false pretenses, even a bank officer I trusted to review suspicious activity. Each conversation was nerve-wracking. I had to be careful not to tip Jake off, but every piece of information I collected felt like another brick in the wall I was building around him. I went through every transaction, cross-referencing receipts, messages, and email confirmations. Patterns emerged that I hadn't noticed before. How Jake always timed his spending for when I had extra cash, how he casually mentioned debts to me that never existed, how every emergency conveniently aligned with his impulsive purchases. Seeing it all laid out in black and white made my stomach twist. For the first time, I realized just how methodical he had been, and my anger surged. Jake started noticing my quiet research, small comments like, "So, checking your accounts again?" and subtle attempts to delete messages or organize his things whenever I was around. I could feel him panicking, though he tried to keep up appearances. Meanwhile, some of our extended family started sensing tension, whispering about our arguments and his sudden defensiveness. Then came the midpoint twist. I discovered Jake had attempted a second forgery, this time with another small loan in my name that hadn't fully processed yet. I felt my chest tighten as I realized he could have sunk me even deeper, all while pretending nothing was wrong. That was the exact moment I understood. This wasn't just reckless behavior. This was deliberate manipulation. Sitting alone that night, the hum of the city outside my window, I felt both fear and power coursing through me. Fear because the battle ahead would be messy, and power because, for the first time, I had a way to strike back. And I knew, deep down, the reckoning was coming, and Jake had no idea how fast it would hit. The day I filed the fraud complaint, I felt a mixture of relief and terror that I couldn't shake. Walking into the bank and handing over every piece of evidence, every screenshot, every statement I had painstakingly collected, I felt the weight of years of manipulation pressing down on me, but also a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking control. The clerk barely blinked as I laid it all out, but I could feel the tension in the room, the gravity of what I was doing sinking in. This wasn't just about a loan anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. When I told Jake, I watched his confident facade start to crumble. You can't do this," he said, voice shaking, trying to sound casual, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I didn't flinch. "I already did," I said, letting the words hang in the air like a hammer. For years, he had controlled situations with charm and manipulation. Now he was the one under scrutiny, and he knew it. Family reactions were predictable. Mom called me later, voice small and trembling. "Are you sure about this? Maybe he didn't realize—" I let her finish without a word. Dad just muttered something about keeping it quiet, clearly uneasy now. It was the first time they couldn't smooth things over for Jake. I realized then that, for the first time, the power had shifted completely. The legal storm wasn't painless. Court dates were scheduled, notices arrived in the mail, and every day carried the anxiety of potential exposure. But with every piece of evidence presented, I could see the truth unraveling around Jake. His lies, his charm, his carefully crafted image, they all began to collapse under the weight of facts. Late at night, sitting in my apartment with the city lights flickering outside, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was just the beginning. The reckoning was coming, and I had the proof to ensure Jake could never manipulate or escape responsibility again. The day everything started going public, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. Court documents had been filed, and Jake's actions were now officially under scrutiny. Friends and distant relatives, who had once only seen his charm, began asking questions. Whispers turned into pointed looks, casual messages became cautious, and I started hearing through the grapevine that people were finally seeing him for who he really was. For years, he'd relied on everyone turning a blind eye. But now, the facade was crumbling. Jake's panic was palpable. "This isn't happening," he muttered one night, pacing the apartment like a cornered animal. I could hear him dialing frantic calls, trying to smooth things over, begging people to side with him, but the evidence was airtight. Every forged signature, every manipulated payment, every lie I had painstakingly documented was coming back to haunt him. It was as if the walls were closing in, and he knew he had no escape. Watching the fallout was surreal. People who once admired him now questioned him. Friends distanced themselves, and even some family members who had favored him began to look at him differently. The humiliation was public, and it was slow, almost cinematic. I could see the anxiety in his face when he realized that charm and excuses weren't going to save him this time. Emotionally, I felt a mix of relief and vindication. I had spent years feeling trapped, angry, and powerless, constantly bailing him out. And now, for the first time, I had the upper hand. But there was still one thing left: ensuring he faced the full consequences of his actions. Late that night, I sat by the window, city lights stretching endlessly, and felt the calm before the storm. Jake's downfall wasn't complete yet, but it was coming. And this time, there would be no chance for him to charm, manipulate, or escape responsibility. The reckoning was near, and I was ready. The day the court ruled in my favor felt surreal, almost unreal. Jake sat across from me in the courtroom, his usual confidence replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression. Every forged signature, every manipulated transaction, every lie he had spun over the years was now officially documented. The judge's words hit like a hammer. He was fully liable for the loan, plus legal fees, and there was no room for negotiation. For years, he had lived like he could manipulate and charm his way out of anything. But now, all that power had evaporated. I watched as the news spread quietly at first. Friends, acquaintances, even distant family members learning the truth. His reputation, carefully crafted over years, crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. Friends who had once laughed at his jokes and admired his charisma suddenly kept their distance. The apartment he once flaunted as his kingdom felt smaller, colder, as the weight of reality settled on him. Emotionally, I felt a strange combination of vindication and relief. Every sleepless night covering his mistakes, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made, it had all been part of a story I was finally rewriting. I wasn't gloating. I was reclaiming what was mine, finally enforcing boundaries that should have existed years ago. There was a final, minor twist that night. Jake, desperate, tried one last manipulation, calling mutual friends to spin the story, claiming I was overreacting. But this time, no one listened. The evidence was indisputable. The law had my back, and his charm had run its course. Sitting alone in my apartment later, the hum of the city outside, I felt the full magnitude of what had happened. Jake was financially ruined, socially isolated, and publicly exposed. I had won, not through anger, but through persistence, preparation, and justice. The weight of betrayal had been lifted, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. The weeks after Jake's downfall were quiet, almost eerily so. I spent a lot of time alone, walking the city streets, thinking about everything that had happened. For years, I had been consumed by anger, stress, and a constant sense of obligation. Now the weight had lifted, and I realized how much I'd sacrificed for someone who never deserved it. It was a strange mix of relief and grief. I was free, but I was also mourning the years I had given to someone who used my trust against me. I started rebuilding parts of my life that I had ignored. My finances, once constantly tied up in covering Jake's mistakes, were finally my own. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, and even some family members who had been blindsided by the truth began to respect my boundaries. Therapy became a regular part of my routine, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to process everything fully and not carry the scars in silence. Each session peeled back layers of guilt and self-blame that I hadn't even realized I'd carried. The hardest part was accepting that some relationships would never return to normal. Some family members remained distant, uncomfortable facing the truth about Jake. I realized that healing wasn't about making everyone happy. It was about reclaiming my peace. I began saying no without guilt, setting clear boundaries, and learning that responsibility doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for someone else's mistakes. There were moments when I still remembered his charm, his empty promises, and I felt a flash of anger, but it was brief. Now, it was tempered by understanding, perspective, and the knowledge that I had taken control of my life. I had survived betrayal, manipulation, and deceit, and I had emerged stronger. Sitting by my window one night, listening to the hum of the city, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. But I also knew that the final chapter was yet to close completely. There was one last piece of closure I needed to feel fully empowered. The final day, everything felt truly resolved. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, documents neatly stacked, a cup of coffee cooling beside me. Jake was officially bankrupt, publicly exposed, and fully accountable for the mess he'd created. No charm, no excuses, no manipulation could save him now. Every loan, every forged signature, every lie had been addressed legally, and the consequences were real and irreversible. I felt a strange mix of relief, vindication, and quiet empowerment. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my life. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice, about finally reclaiming my trust, my finances, and my peace of mind. I reflected on all the sleepless nights, the stress, the anxiety that had plagued me, and I realized that none of it had been in vain. I had faced betrayal head-on, navigated fear and manipulation, and emerged stronger, smarter, and more self-assured. Family dynamics had shifted too. Some apologized, acknowledging the truth they had ignored, while others quietly distanced themselves. I didn't mind. Boundaries were no longer negotiable. I had learned that loyalty is valuable, but blind trust can be dangerous. The people who truly mattered recognized my strength, and that recognition was worth more than any reconciliation with the manipulators. Emotionally, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The humiliation, the panic, the constant pressure, they were gone. I had set my life back on my terms. My finances were secure, my future planned, and my sense of self intact. I had won not by spite, but by persistence and courage. As I closed the folder of evidence for the last time, I smiled faintly, thinking about Jake and all he had lost. I felt no gloating, only the satisfaction of a battle fought fairly, methodically, and with integrity. Justice had been served, and I was finally free. The city outside hummed softly through my window, indifferent, yet somehow perfect in its constancy. I had survived betrayal, exposed deception, and emerged empowered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole.